Hello again. How are you?
I am very well, thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show. It's nice to have you here. So I see on your bio that you're from Massachusetts. Do you still live there?
I don't. I live in Connecticut now.
Oh, okay. Because I'm originally from Boston, and
Oh,
for many, many years, I lived there my whole life and moved away at 43 and moved to Las Vegas. So
well,
nice.
that's a different environment.
Oh, yeah, slightly different. But well, I do kind of miss it, but I don't miss the long, cold winters. But
Well, we do have those.
yeah,
They're not as cold as they used to be.
true. So, you've got a book out called Breaking Glass, and I was reading through your bio, and this book is sort of a follow up to your first book called Little Sister, which was sort of a memoir. Do you have other books published or just these two?
I just have those two.
Oh, okay.
So, the Little Sister was the memoir of my growing up, and Breaking Glass is basically a sequel to it. It starts where I left off when I'm kicked out of my home.
Do you want to just give us a little bit of a backstory on Little Sister, just so we know the story prior to Breaking Glass?
So, I was born into a religious community uh, that was in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And within a few years, there were about 100 members of this community, 60 adults and 39 children. 12 married couples were among the adults. And we were very ardently Catholic. I'm so Catholic that, in fact, we were ultimately excommunicated. And there was this dogma that you had to be a Catholic to be saved. And basically, we were being taught, I as a child, that the only people being saved were the 100 of us. And I just, found that a little disturbing, particularly as I knew I had a grandmother, et cetera, et cetera. But long and story short, we left Cambridge and we moved out into the countryside and took on a monastic existence where silence was the rule, where the little boys and little girls couldn't talk to each other. The children had all been separated from their parents. The parents had been forced into taking vows of celibacy. And we were being groomed as children to be members of the community as adults. And one of the requirements was that we not ever get married. And all my childhood, I would dream about, finding my prince and being carried away and living in a beautiful castle and having lots of children, etc. And that just wasn't the life that I wanted. That being said, nature took its course, and somewhere in my early teens, I started to get a crush on, people in the men in the community. And it was that one incident that, in essence, told the woman that ran the place, a woman named Sister, whom we called Sister Catherine, to expel me. As I said, we were raised and taught there. We'd never had any television or radio. I'd never been to a restaurant. I'd never even held a dollar bill. And at the age of 17, when I graduated from our school, where we were classically educated, I was banished. No invitation to come back. My parents didn't leave with me. And my four siblings were left behind as well. So Sister Catherine, who ran it, allowed that she would pay for me to take a secretarial course. I had been accepted at Vassar and Bates. My father was an academician, thoughtful, brilliant man, but she made the rules, and that rule held. So I went to secretarial school and graduated 6 months later. And then the story of Breaking Glass comes in. It talks about that migration from being in this community, which I considered home and which I absolutely loved, admitting that I didn't want to be a nun, and migrating into the real world where I didn't know the language, didn't know the people, was, culturally an infant, and having to keep my eyes and ears open, my mouth closed until I learned the language of the world. And after going to that secretarial school, I was on my own. I had to find a job and a home to stay. And I stayed at the YWCA in the south end of Boston. I went for an interview. The first interview I had was with a brokerage firm. They offered me the job on the spot, asked me if I could start the next day, and there started my career. And at the age of 19, all I wanted to do was be the best receptionist in the world. And I bent over backwards to be helpful. I made myself adaptable. I made myself valuable. And that was just step one. I don't know if I'd been the receptionist at a car dealership, if my career might have been entirely different. But the first step I took was in the world of finance. A year after being the receptionist, the two directors, the partners, sent me to New York, asked me if I'd be willing to go there. I said, of course, and pick up $5 million to close a deal. I didn't even know what a deal was, but I went to New York. I picked up the $5 million, and when I came home that evening and gave them the money, they took me out to dinner at the Ritz-Carlton in Boston. And that night I lay in bed and thought, I wonder if I can ever have that life that they have. And little by little, I worked hard at it. And that's just the very beginning of the breaking glass part.
The $5 million that they had you pick up, was that in cash?
No, fortunately not. There was like cashier's checks, each for $1 million. Yes, I'm not sure. I might have had to have a Brinks armed car or something if I had done it the other way. But no, but they were all prepared for me, and I had a car service, a driver that was taking me to each of the different sites. And then I was looking at this $5 million, on the airplane coming home from New York to Boston. And I've never held $5 million. I don't think I'd ever even held $10,000 at that age. But it was a great first experience. And it really taught me, mostly with the benefit of hindsight, but that the way I had approached my job, which was to be available and to be helpful, was working wonders.
Do you think that was a test on their part? Because, I mean, those checks could have been sent by FedEx or something like that, right? They didn't need...
That really wasn't the way it was done back then. I mean, we're talking 1969.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe then. Okay.
And that really was a different era. I mean, there were no electronics, really, for all intents and purposes. I mean, there was ticker tape, and there was, all of that. So it was a very logical way to do it, and probably relatively inexpensive.
Everything that big would have been done by hand courier on an airplane or something like that. Okay. All right. So I guess I want to ask you, did you find, because there's a lot of things on here about being in a job that was predominantly male, did you find, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, prejudiced or biased when you started to rise in your career, that the men didn't take you seriously, or that you had any kind of discrimination because of your gender?
I may have had some discrimination because of my gender, but I wouldn't say they didn't take me seriously. I think they took me too seriously and decided that they would call me the Witch of Wall Street. And I've thought a lot about that, because I decided, I mean, I only found out a few years ago that that's what they were calling me. And they weren't all calling me that. But I thought, wait, just because I was hard charged and aggressive, and yes, admittedly did, break some china along the way, and a perfectionist and wanted everything done right. When men were there, they weren't called a wizard, or which might even have been a congratulatory comment. Those would have been considered leadership attributes. But when they were done by a woman, they got her named the Witch of Wall Street. So I've thought about that a lot, and it doesn't really bother me, but it does say that certain characteristics are tolerated in men and not tolerated in women. And I accept that. And I really think that you can't change the world entirely, but you can change the world for yourself. And maybe every single person has to do it on their own. And I can understand that and believe that. And so I think that for me, just work as hard as I can. If they end up calling me a witch, well, I've now decided that that's a badge of honor.
I was going to ask you if you took that as a compliment or an insult, because I think you could take it either way, right?
Well, initially I was horrified. And it was only 5 years ago when I heard it. So I was 70 and I went, how did I never know this? But in fact, I am taking it as a badge of honor. It's basically saying she's one of the men, but maybe they didn't really appreciate that. But it's true that as a woman, you are judged more harshly. I know that. And so I think in a way you have to be even better, because in a powerful world like that of, finance, hard driving business, they want to know that you're going to be there. And I think that for many, many people, there's always lurking in the back of their mind, is she going to stay around or is she going to go home and have children? And I waited a long time, and I'm glad I didn't wait too long, but I waited a long time before I had my children. I was 45 when I gave birth to my twins. And so I had already completed, lots of my career. I still went on from there. But then there came a point where I made that decision that women do have to face. Men have to face it as well, but let's just take the reality case and say, but for the most part, in those circumstances, it's the woman that would decide to go home. And I did that at the age of 51 when my children were about to enter the first grade. And I didn't object to having a nanny around for those early years when you're doing play dates and things like that. But once they were getting in school, I wanted to be around. And that was what made me say, it's time now at age 51 to leave. And I did leave Wall Street, but I didn't have any plans for what might follow, but was very fortunate again in finding another career that gave me a huge amount of flexibility. And it was as well as a double career as both an expert witness as well as a board member.
Did you work primarily in Boston's financial district or New York Wall Street?
No, I came to New York in 1975 and have been basically New York centric ever since.
Well, I guess we're just about out of time. I wanted to ask you, so now you're retired from the financial world, are you?
Yes, I am. I still manage some of my own money, but yes, I am. I don't manage money for other people.
Do you imagine yourself becoming a full-time author and writing more books? Or is it just you wanted to tell your story and be done with it?
I do have another story, but I don't think I could ever write fiction. So, but it might be a series of essays. But I really am quite full-time also, because I co-founded a company in 2016, which is a healthcare company for the LGBTQ community in Connecticut. And we have about 4,000 patients, and I am the pro bono CEO of that organization. So I'm very much still a working person. And hopefully, even 10 years from now, I'll be finding, maybe even 20, finding ways of staying engaged. I love the challenge.
Well, Patricia, thank you so much for coming on the show. Last question, do you have a website that you want to give out?
I do. Thank you for asking. It's patriciachadwick.com. And it's got things about my first book. And I write a regular blog. I've just written one for Mother's Day, which will be on there. And yes, that would be great. And of course, there's a link there to purchase my book. But you can also, hopefully, you can ask your local bookstore to get it. But you certainly can buy it online as well. Thank you so much for asking.
Well, thank you for coming on this show, and best of luck with your books and all your other work.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.